Hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. I'm Sean Kimberley, Channels Television's global headquarters in Lagos, Nigeria. A lot has happened in the past week over the several issues, national issues, and on top of what Nigerians were talking about is a ministerial screening. And the same week is an unfortunate event in the aftermath of a violent engagement of protesters of the Shiite group, the Islamic Movement of Nigeria, which led to the death of a core member, Precious Owolabi, who worked as a reporter with Channels Television, and a police officer. The federal government plans to proscribe the group. We shall be discussing these issues in details. But first, we shall also be talking to a member of the National Assembly who wants to be the governor of Kogi State in north-central Nigeria, Senator Dino Melaye, who will be joining me on the program. But first, let's be touching on some of the major issues in the land, the issues of security. Now, the federal government, part of a major challenge facing the country is the issues of security and how some of these issues have spread across some parts of the country, from the issues of bandit activities to kidnapping, and beyond the major issues of battling insurgency in the northeastern region of the country. We've seen violence erupt in the protests of the Shiite group Islamic Movement of Nigeria. But a new twist has come into that over the prolonged battle between the federal government and members of the Islamic Movement of Nigeria and the federal government. And as the federal government now has obtained a court order proscribing the group and declaring them a terrorist. A lawyer and the Chamber of the Attorney General of the Federation confirmed that the Solicitor General, Mr. Dayo Akpata, obtained the expertise order on behalf of the federal government late on Friday. A vacation judge in the Federal High Court in Abuja, Justice Ikionye Maha, who reportedly granted the order, also designated the activities of the Shiites in any part of the country, quote, as acts of terrorism and illegality. The court also restrains, quote, any person or group of persons from participating in any form of activities involving or concerning the IMN, quote, under any name or platform, end of quote, in the country. To complete the prescription process against the Shiite group, the court asked the Attorney General of the Federation to publish the court has asked the Attorney General of the Federation to publish the order prescribing the respondent Islamic Movement in Nigeria in the official gazette and 2 national daily. Well, the presidency has come out to defend itself, saying the prescription of Islamic Movement of Nigeria (IMN) has nothing to do with banning the larger numbers of peaceful and law-abiding Shiites in the country from practicing their religion. Instead, it was to discourage wanton violence, murder, and willful destruction of public and private property. The presidency explained further that contrary to the claim by IMN that it had been banned from practicing its religion, President Buhari's administration has not banned Shiite from observing their 5 daily prayers and going to Mecca to perform their holy pilgrimage. Their position, according to the president, that is the IMN, that is blatantly false and deceptive. Let's get talking about this, everyone. I have joining me from our Abuja studio, a former chairman of the National Human Rights Commission, a lawyer and rights activist, Professor Chidi Odinkalu. Thank you so much, Professor, for coming on the program tonight. You've been following what has happened over the past few weeks or so about the activities of the IMN, the Islamic Movement of Nigeria, with the decision of the federal government. This is not the first time the federal government will be prescribing a group in the Buhari administration. They did to a group last year. But what is your immediate take on this?
Thank you, Sean. Good evening. I don't know. Do you know Mauritania? Mauritania is a country that that's had slavery for a long time. And Mauritania has the record of having banned slavery for over 24 times. Pretty much every year, Mauritania rolls out a measure, a legislative instrument or a presidential decree banning slavery. After a while, you've got to understand that something is wrong. I don't know how many times we are going to be banning the Shiites or the IMN. They've been banned at the state level. They've been proscribed allegedly at the state level in Kaduna. They are now proscribed at the federal level by the federal government. Their properties have been destroyed. And their leader is somewhere in the general ether. But it's got at a point to be clear that some of these instrumentalities are limited and probably also self-defeating. Now, there are not too many terrorist organizations, and I think it is a very serious thing to designate anybody, any entity, a terrorist organization. Boko Haram never went to court, let's be clear. IMN is the only designated entity that is a judgment creditor of the federal government. Now, it's got not one order, not two, not three, against the federal government before this ex parte order that's been obtained this past few days. It's got several orders that the federal government has refused to comply with. And at the end of the day, that at some level has got to cast aspersions, in my view, on this measure. But the question I keep asking is, how many times are you going to ban the same group?
The question here, banning some of their activities is another thing, but prescribing their activities, that means that outrightly, the danger or the line between that is that the extent at which they can practice their religion. I think that is what the group is talking about. But the federal government had come out to say, what they have done is that they cannot allow them to continue in activities that can lead to wanton destruction of public properties and danger to the society. The president said that the banned organization was taken over by extremists who did not believe in peaceful protest and instead employed violence and arson, driving fear and undermining the rights of others and constituted authority. Professor, could there be any other way in stemming the violence that have erupted between this group and the state?
By the way, you know, lots of lives have been lost, and it's appropriate to extend condolences to you lot at particular channels. You've lost an invaluable life here and in Precious Owolabi, and you know, a law enforcement asset, a very senior law enforcement asset has been lost. Several of the Shiites have also been lost. All of these, every life is invaluable, and you know, no life is worth more than the other. And it seems to me that I think government has got a responsibility, particularly as many of these lives involve the discharge of projectiles and bullets, that we've got a responsibility to determine where the projectiles came from. That, I think, is very important. We can't just bury these people with the projectiles and forget that these are lives. And Nigeria is not the first place in which protests are taking place. Look at what's happening in Hong Kong, for instance. The Puerto Ricans have just sacked their governor from the streets. Hong Kong has been deluged by protests for the past several weeks, if not months. And nobody's been shooting live bullets in the Hong Kong parliament. So now, there is always a principle of proportionality in law enforcement. And you don't want to get into a situation of killing a fly with a hammer. No one in their right senses should speak up in favor of violent protests. No, that's not agreeable. Now, does the serial proscription, allegedly, of an entity itself constitute anything more than a diminution of state authority? Because we should not get into proscribing an entity more than once. If we proscribe an entity more than once, it says the instrumentality of proscription itself is in question. Its effectiveness is in question. And I think that really that's where we are at the moment. It doesn't seem to me that proscription, in the manner that the state has chosen to do it, is an effective response to what we've got here. And to do it ex parte for an entity that's already proscribed, in my view, appears to not make a lot of sense.
But I think
look,
that, Prof,
the orders are going to be published.
Sorry,
and then
sorry
we'll
if I'm butting, but I think, Prof, that I allegedly that they were prescribed in Kaduna State, not nationally. But this time around is a federal government. That means it's a national movement, not a state, not on the basis of a state. So if they have been prescribed in the state, it does not get into other regions of the country. So, but this time around, is it not on a national level?
We'll see when we look at the terms of the orders that have been issued. But as I said, look, IMN is a judgment creditor of the federal government. Not once, not twice, not three times. As a matter of fact, their lead lawyer is now a commissioner in INEC. Festus Okoye was the lead lawyer for IMN. All right? Now, how many terrorist organizations go hiring senior lawyers and senior advocates of Nigeria as their advocates? That's the question.
But, Prof, how would you suppose that this group, for example, go about their business? Because when activities that, no matter what, because there's been a question between the right of a citizen and the issues of the security of the state or the national security, how do you suppose that the federal government handle this better in your own thinking?
Section 45 of the Constitution gives us a framework. It's there. The rights to the political rights in the Constitution are subject to limitation by means of law reasonably justifiable in a democratic society for blah, 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 blah. It's there. All right? There's ample jurisprudence that defined what the parameters are. Quite clearly, we are now in a situation in which the judiciary is being clobbered, and its confidence in policing the bounds of this jurisprudence at best is very slippery and very fragile, and we're seeing that in some of the quite interesting decisions that are coming out of the court systems. That's just the way it is, and I think everybody can see that. Well, you know, we just have been through we are going through the ministerial confirmations in which one of the three senior advocates on the list, who functioned as Attorney General of the Federation, quite happily told the Senate that he could pick and choose what court orders he obeyed, and you know, he could exercise a line item editing facility to decide whether a court order was worth obeying or not. And we're all very entranced by it. That's where we are now.
Well, I will get to the analysis of that Senate screening of ministers in ministerial nominees in a moment. But again, in the light of the security situation in the country, as the federal government is trying to put its hand on quenching one of the fire, another fire is rising from somewhere. And well, on Monday we will see how the gazetting of this prescription goes and what the Shiite group will do next, because they've said that they cannot be. Mr. Falana, by the way, had said that the action of the federal government is illegal and immoral. How do you suppose that the federal government should go about this if senior lawyers in the land are condemning what the federal government is doing on this group? How do we stop this and make sure it's a political means of ending the constant protest by this group and what has come out as a consistent violence that has emerged from the protests?
Let's be clear. The Shiites have not been violent historically. The IMN has not been violent historically. I think that they've done a lot of protests in which, you know, when I was the chair of the National Human Rights Commission, I did visit them, and I did visit to commiserate with them on the loss of 33, I believe, or 37 of their members at a time when government was beginning to move to put them beyond pale of communication. And since then, of course, they've lost, in the Zaria massacre, the numbers killed cannot be told, have not been verified, although the Commission of Inquiry said there were 347 or thereabouts people that the military buried. It took them about 6 hours to do so in 5 trucks, taking over 3.5 hours, according to the official narrative in the Commission of Inquiry report. The group claims over 1,000 people were killed. Now, at that level, you are looking to create negative memory that begins to drive people into zones you don't want any entity or group of people to get to. The one thing you don't want to do, and in 2 days' time, 30th of July, it will be 10 years since the extrajudicial execution of Mohammed Yusuf, and see where we have come to with the entity, the monster that he let loose. Now, the one thing you really don't want to do is to drive an entity like the IMN underground, because when you do that, what effectively you do is you deepen the pathology of insecurity in the country at a time when all of our assets of security in the security services are very stretched. That is not a luxury we can afford as a country.
Let me quickly get your view, Professor, on the screening. Perhaps, first and foremost, is how do you think that these have gone in the wake of the bow and go syndrome that we've seen so far in the ministerial screening? That on one hand. Another issue would be the quality and the depth of the people that made up the 43 nominee list of President Muhammadu Buhari.
Well, it's the prerogative of a president to nominate his ministers, and the president has chosen to do that. And it is also the responsibility of the Senate to give consent, and that's what they're going through. The one thing, there are several things. I think with the Senate process, all of this bow and go thing has brought this process, in my view, into disrepute. It's not a very serious process, quite clearly, partly as a result of the fact that the president has failed to indicate what portfolios that the nominees should get. And so the questions are being asked based on part voodoo, part guesswork. And the quality has been quite uneven. The list itself is quite interesting. 43 people, 2 nominees from 7 states, I believe 9 nominees from the Northwest, with 2 each from Kaduna and Kano. You know, it's a recycling, you know, it's a very environmentally friendly cabinet list. You know, a lot of recycling is taking place there. That's, you know, we're saving the planet, I guess, with this particular list of cabinet. 14 returning ministers, 10 ex-governors, including 1 former military administrator who was also a commander of the Brigade of Guards, 9 lawyers, 8 people who have previously held office as elective office as PDP party members, 7 women, 6 ex-senators, 5 people under 50, 5 over 70, 5 engineers, I believe. There are also, you've got 3 medical doctors, 2 former deputy governors. Then you've got 1 economist, Senator Saraki. You've also got 1 chartered accountant amongst the lot of them, and 1 serving legislator. Now, that's a very environmentally friendly cabinet. You know, you've got to be proud of it, I guess. It's recycling.
Let's take a break, Professor. But when we come back, we'll talk more about the issues on the insecurity in the land, the proscription of the Shiite group, the Islamic movement of Nigeria, and some of the issues that are being raised. Join us again, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. Let's continue with the conversation. I've been talking to Professor Odinkalu, the former chairman of the National Human Rights Commission, lawyer, rights activist. Thanks so much, Professor, for talking to us. Before I allow you go, is a major point for Nigerians beyond the bow and go tradition that we saw over the last week is the issue of what is on the table that this cabinet and President Buhari will have to deal with. Are you convinced about the crop of personalities that the president have put together that in the next 4 years, they will get the job done?
Look, it's not for me to be convinced. It's the president's cabinet. He knows why he chose them. He told us wants to choose only people whom he knows. I would not have believed until I saw this list that the president knew so many people who are customers of the EFCC. There are too many of them, people who have charges, people whose properties have been confiscated, who are who are standing trial. After seeing this list, I wonder what Mr. Magu and Professor Wasonye would feel about the jobs they have at the EFCC and the ICPC. But the other thing is really that looking at the proceedings, I was sometimes lost as to what we were doing. I mean, my good brother and friend Festus Kayamo says he will unbundle the Supreme Court and clear cost lists. And I began to think that he was auditioning for the job of Chief Justice and not undergoing confirmation for the job of Attorney General, because he's got no business, for God's sake, with all due respect, with the Supreme Court. That's not the brief of the Attorney General. Unbundling the Supreme Court, what does that mean from a lawyer, a cabinet? It just crosses all lines, for God's sake. You're talking about, there is something called separation of powers. There is something called independence of the judiciary. It's not in the mouth of an Attorney General or Justice Minister or any minister of the executive to be unbundling the Supreme Court. To do that, in any case, you've got to amend the Constitution. Cost lists. It's not the business of the Attorney General to manage cost lists in the courts. That is the business of the courts. That is the problem with this entire process. People think that it's a joke. It's not. And a lawyer of Festus's standing and now surely knows that that was beyond his brief. So I presume he was trying to impress Nigerians who don't know any better. And for that, maybe he succeeded.
Professor Odinkalu, I must sincerely thank you for coming on the program tonight. Rights activist and former chairman of the National Human Rights Commission. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.